Okay, so remember in the last section we talked about synthetic division and the fact that there are three words that mean the same thing: a zero, a factor, and an x-intercept. So when we're looking at zeros of polynomial functions, we are now looking at a factor of a polynomial function. Now, the deal with a factor is the fact that it is a linear factor. So if I want to determine if something is a factor, we do our synthetic division, and then we see if the remainder is zero, then it's go time. Remember again, also, when we're looking at these problems, anything next to an x is opposite. So whenever I go to put this value in, if it's x minus 1, you want the opposite of that minus 1 being a positive 1. Also, keep in mind, I'm missing my cubed term, so we'll have to put in a placeholder there of 0. Then 3, our negative 5, and our 7. So drop that 2, multiply and add, multiply and add. So 1 times 2 is 2. 1 times 2 is 2, giving me a 5. 1 times 5 is 5 for a 0. 1 times 0 is 0. And I have a remainder here of 7. So does that mean x minus 1 is yes or not? No, a factor. No, good. So this is not a factor. In order to be a factor, it has to have 0 as the remainder. Good. Let's try another one. For this one, again, I want to determine if x minus 1 is a factor, so I'm going to put 1 in my box, and I'm going to go down. So 3, negative 2, 1, negative 8, 5, and 1. Because keep in mind, if there's nothing in front, it's a coefficient of 1. Drop that 3, and I have 3 times 1 is 3, and I add them up, giving me a 1. 1 plus 1 is 2, so I get a negative 6. Which gives me a negative 1, and I get my remainder of 0. So, is x minus 1 a factor of this polynomial? You betcha it is. Good. That's it. Synthetic division. A 0 is a factor. All of these things mean the same thing, so we're just building on that last section that we covered. Okay, now we can use the fact that we have zeros to factor a polynomial. When we factor a polynomial, that means we're going to be putting everything in parentheses. So remember, factoring, whenever I have this, is putting it all in parentheses, those linear factors. So I'm going to take something that's to the third power. I'm going to be given that negative 3 is a 0. But my goal here, whenever I'm looking at this, is to break it down to a quadratic. And my goal, in order to break it down to a quadratic, is so that I have something squared. As soon as we have a quadratic, we've learned several different ways to break down a quadratic. We can use factoring, quadratic formula, completing the square, zero factor property. Oh, we already said that one. Square root property, if that applies. Now, a tip I will give you just in this class that we're working with, if it says factoring, you break it down to a quadratic and it will factor. There is no need for any of the other ones because of the concept that we're working on. It will factor at that point. Okay, so let's do it right now. I'm going to go ahead and take my negative 3 here, put it in my box, and I've got 6, 19, 2, and negative 3. Drop that 6. So 6 times 3 is going to be a negative 18, giving me a 1. Negative 3 times 1 is a negative 3. And then negative 3 times 3 is a 3. If you get anything other than a 0 there, you did it wrong because you are given this 0. So the fact that I am given this 0, I already know it's going to work. Now, remember whenever we did our dividing, we go 1 degree less. I now have a 6x squared plus a 1x minus 1. Now I have a quadratic. and we can factor that. So break it into your two sets of parentheses. 3x and 2x are going to give me that 6 with a minus in the back. I know my signs are different. So I check my outside terms here. So if I have my outside terms, I've got 3x times 1 is a positive 3, negative 2x, that'll give me that positive 1. Positive 3, negative 2 is a positive 1. Good. Now here's the deal. When you work these problems, notice this little guy right here. That 3 tells you that that is how many factors or zeros you can have. Right now, I have 2 factors. My third factor is right here with this other 0. So with that, remember, anything next to an x is opposite. So if that's an x, that's a minus 3 there, I want to write this as x plus 3 so that it can be a factor. And there they are. So given a 0, you just go through and you break it down to a quadratic, factor it, and then these are what your linear factors look like. Pretty sweet, right? Let's do some more.